Hi, everyone.
What's up, y'all?
How are you doing?
Get pumped, get
Love
pumped.
to hear it. We saw so many cool new ways to design for your users and build applications today, and we're going to talk about a few more. So I hope you're excited for that. My name is Yuna. I work on the web platform on the Google Chrome team, and our team focuses on everything that is UI related, so CSS, HTML, the interactive pieces of the web, and the dev tools to help you debug and build on this platform.
My name is Argyle. I'm a design school graduate, and I'm just a crafter. I love building, I love teaching, and I love trying all this stuff out and listening to y'all and making sure that we have the tools you need, and we have a ton of stuff to show you today. So it's time to get stoked.
Woo!
We've got things that you didn't even know you could do, and we want you to start asking your developers to do. So get ready for an incoming whirlwind of Radical. It's going to pack you full of inspo.
We're also going to talk about some micro interaction opportunities to take advantage of all the little bits and pieces that your users are interacting with on your page.
Yep, and user-oriented design opportunities so you can bring them into the process.
We'll talk about much smarter components that are logical and own their own responsive logical styles.
Same with layouts. We'll have intelligent layouts that can adapt to the things that they need to represent and change.
And all of this should give you a little bit of a competitive design edge because you're making super personalized experiences. So let's get started with this subject, responsive design. Actually, just throw out everything that you thought that you knew about responsive design. Throw out all of your assumptions that responsive design is limited to screen sizes and multiple viewport sizes, thinking about mobile and then desktop and how we get in between. Because today, we're expanding our definition of responsive design, and we're talking about a new age of responsive design. This new age of responsive design capabilities, which is being ushered in by some pretty big changes in the capabilities that developers have when building user interfaces. And in this talk, we're going to focus on the web platform, which is one of the most flexible mediums that you have to design for today. For better or for worse, sometimes it can be really frustrating, and sometimes it can be really liberating to design for such a flexible medium that is on so many different types of screens and devices. And we'll show you how to take advantage of some of these new tools that we have for progressive enhancement and user customization. We now have more features than ever to let you build interfaces that are responsive to the devices that your application lives on and the capabilities of those devices, to your users and their needs, their preferences, their locales. Your users can now become a part of the design process and design along with you, which is really cool. And the interface that the component lives within. So this is that logical styling, letting those components own a lot more information and style themselves based on where they are and what their children are and what the states are and all the variants of those components. And all of this works in conjunction to support an entirely new mental model for responsive design. So let's get started with being responsive to the device.
And we all know there's a ton of new devices coming out there. We have foldables. They sometimes are in landscape, sometimes they're in portrait. You've got your desktop, you've got your mama bear, your baby bear, your daddy bear. You have all these different devices. Lots of bears, and each bear has a different capability, right? One plays soccer, I don't know. But each of these is a micro opportunity for you to design something special for that moment. Because if a user folds out their phone in two ways, you can tie into both their thumbs instead of designing for a single thumb. And you get cool opportunities to split the layout. And these components, they need to know less about being in a page and more about how much space that they have to represent. And we're going to talk all about that today.
So now we also have some new device viewport units on the platform that let you fix this issue of what the context is that you're designing for. And this is a problem that exists today because when we design for full viewport experiences, maybe we have web apps, maybe we want desktop experiences that are full height. When we use something like 100 VH, which is supposed to be 100% of the viewport, this model breaks when we have things like footers and headers. But now we have dynamic viewport units such as small viewport, large viewport, and dynamic viewport units that let you style things based on the user's context. If you have that header bar or footer bar that's open, we now have the ability to design more consistently across different web browsers, how they work, because there's so many different browsers that your users use. If they're in a web app or a web view, if they're on a fridge, if they're on a watch, all of the different contexts that they can be inside of.
So that was all about device screen sizes. And what about device color capabilities? I know most of you in your pocket have a new phone that's been around in the past 6 years, and it always touts some millions of colors, maybe billions of colors. And well, what we see here is an SDR color gradient. It's going from hot pink to, I think, orange, and it looks pretty good. But that's standard dynamic range. This is using hex colors, and your phone in your pocket, most of the TVs and screens that you have at home can do more. So let's switch slides to see HDR gradients.
Ooh.
You get more vibrancy, you get more smoothness, and a lot more opportunities to really pop and have a design advantage compared to other colors. And so, yeah, what's new?
We have a lot of new advances in both vibrancy and predictability in color contrast now as a part of the core web platform.
We have predictable color contrast. That means when you're using the L channel, so HSL has a kind of wild lightness channel, whereas OKLCH and some of these new color spaces have a very reliable L channel, and you can depend on it to have high contrast across varying hues and saturations.
Yeah, and you can also now dynamically mix colors on the fly in your browsers using new color mix functions.
And we've got vibrant and smoother gradients, which I can't wait to show you because they're so rad.
So cool.
Well, here's a couple of color examples. So on the left, very traditionally when we make color palettes, we pick them by hand. And there's like a good reason for that. But usually we're also making palettes like just for a light theme. And so on left, we're looking at the SDR Material handcrafted color palette, which has served it very well for light themes and et cetera. And usually math-driven palettes don't have the same oomph and the same power that you get with a hand-chosen one. But look at that on the right. I made that one very mathematically, and I have a very wide range, not in just from lights to darks. Like in OKLCH, you get a hotter red. If you look at the red in the middle, that's much more vibrant than the red that's on Material. But I also have more opportunities for light colors and dark colors, and it's HDR. I take that same palette, and since I'm in a consistent lightness channel in OKLCH, all I do is change the hue, and I can make any palette. So I have 360 different palettes I can make by just changing a base hue, and I have 3 different flavors of grays. I have a regular, like a neutral gray, I have a warm gray, and a cool gray, and all I do is give them a hint of a hue and a little bit of chroma. I kind of watch them warm up or cool down, and it's really powerful, really smooth.
Yeah, and those subtle differences make a huge difference to your user and the brand and the feel of your applications. So going beyond this, we now have the ability to mix colors together. So you can take 2 different color values and use the color mix function dynamically for backgrounds, for colors, for any piece of your UI, borders. You can change the % of your mix so you can have more than of one color than the other. And you can also mix in different color spaces, which is a really important detail because the color space in which you mix, regardless of the color space of those color values, will give you a different result. So this slide shows that even though we're mixing the same colors, red to blue or red to green, the way that those colors are interpolating and spanning through the planes of color to go from one color to another looks very, very different depending on the color space in which we're mixing. And this is really important because things on the web platform now give you the ability to make these decisions and to decide how you want to interpolate and swap from one space to another. And you can go beyond that and create variants of your color theming systems by using this color mix function, or soon, relative color syntax in CSS. Here we have an example where we have some brand values. So we have a custom property or a variable that is pink and blue, and all of these semi-transparent variants of it. And the way that we're doing this is by mixing these brand colors with transparent, the keyword of transparent in the sRGB color space. So for the first time ever in CSS now, we can preserve your brand colors while creating variants of them that are dynamic. So as I change these color values, the entire color palette is going to change. Hopefully, we can have the ability for design tokens or variables now to have things like this inside of Figma, inside of the design platform, inside of systems, so we can have these color systems that look at each other and are calculated based off of other values, which would be awesome. But we do have this capability on the web platform already, so you can already start to think this way. And that extends to interfaces. So in this example, we have an interface where we're building something that is dynamically set up using accessible contrast systems by ensuring luminosity differences. The calculation between the luminosity is high enough to always be accessible when we're having text on surface colors. And as we change the tint, we have a different effect. So we can now support accessibility while changing the hue and know that it's going to be accessible because of math, because we set up our color systems in a very reliable way. So we can do all of these things dynamically. It's so cool.
Yeah, this is still all HDR color because our screens have this new capability. And another thing we want to tap to is vibrancy. And so neons are really cool. And so when you do neons and hex, you can pump out as much as that SDR space can do. But what this particular demo does is it pushes into the display P3 color space if the device is capable. So you've got a 25-year-old color model that's very neon, but then if you're in a newer device, you get super neon. And in your hand, your users will see the difference. It's popping right off the screen. Like, check out this next demo with Beat Saber, and it is just hot. We also get additional things like in our gradients, we get less banding in the color because we have more depth in the color. We have more depth in the blacks and more depth in the white. So that glow that's happening there is a wide glow, which traditionally in a design tool or in the web might get banded and look kind of bad. But in an HDR screen that has so many more colors, it's able to show that and have the fidelity that we really, really want.
Yeah.
In this particular demo too, we have lots of gradient text on the web. I love gradient text, especially for releasing a new JavaScript library. You gotta have some JavaScript text on there.
You have to have gradients now.
So on the left is Figma config with hex colors. It's hot pink to cyan to very vibrant colors from the RGB color space. But on the right, I've done the same thing in OKLCH, where I've chosen a very HDR pink and an HDR cyan, and I've interpolated the gradient in the OKL's color space. And look at the middle between the two. Notice how the G looks kind of gray and just like the sun hit it for months. And then on the right, we've got Figma.
Faded.
Figma looking popping like it just popped out of the oven, and it's like it just got painted and it looks delightful. So these new features are on the web for you right now, and you just got to know that HDR color is coming and it's here for you. And this next slide is, these are the gradients that were behind both of those texts. So on the left, we had that hot pink to cyan and hex, and on the right, we have OKLCH, super hot pink to super pop and cyan. And look at the middle space, it stays vibrant through the whole thing, super rad.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop. So like, if you're doing a gradient, we saw how color mix produced all these different interim colors depending on the color space. Look at just black to white. You're like, color spaces, they don't do much. Yes, they do. Okay, so we have sRGB at the top, which is the only one you've ever had an option for until now. Now we have all these other choices. And to make things easier for you, OKLab is going to be your best choice generally for mixing or for gradients. And look how smooth it is. It has a nice amount of black in the beginning, a nice amount of whites in the end. But if you look at like HSL, sRGB linear is really packing things towards the end, and it makes it kind of an awkward space if you want a smooth gradient. So let's look at the blue to white. This is a space that always shows the troubling areas of a color space. So if we look at sRGB at the top, it does go a little pink, or it goes a little purple. Some of them go really purple,
pink,
like Lab and LCH. But again, look at OKLab. It's the only one that stayed true to the hue that you asked to go from one to the next. And it's because OKLab is a specially made color space for things like gradients. They pack the vibrant colors together so that when you want to go from one to the next, it stays vibrant. This is important stuff to know as you're building out these modern HDR color spaces, color systems that can reach into these new device capabilities. So I built a tool for you too. You can see it right now. It's at gradient.style. It allows you to both choose colors in these new color spaces and interpolate, so set the gradient color space, and then you get also really cool little tools that feel very much like a design tool, right? You've got a radial tool, linear and conic gradients. You can see them, twist them, and that outputs code for you. It outputs an old SDR gradient for you and a new modern gradient for you. So you can just give that syntax to a developer and say, do it.
Progressive enhancement, we love it.
We love it. And here's a little snippet of some code. So this is how you can check. This is like that neon example. We have a neon red and a neon blue. You can see I'm maxing out R in the RGB. I'm maxing out blue in the neon blue. But then I have two queries asking the device what it can do. The first one says, hey, screen, can you do dynamic range high colors? Can you do HDR colors? And if it says yes, then it enters in that next block. Then the next one says, do you understand display P3 syntax? Can I give you a display P3 color screen? And it says yes. At which point I switch the neon red and neon blue variables to use display P3, and I max out each channel, and I get the hottest red and the hottest blue that that device can do with just a couple of questions that I ask it.
This is dynamic range mode. So let's talk about now being responsive to your user and how we can put your user at the center of everything you do, bringing them along with you on the design process. Accessibility is really critical in design. And you might not realize this, but some unit values are a lot more accessible than others. So one example here is using ems or rems, where rem is the root em unit. These have the ability to scale along with your preferred font size for your user. So something like a pixel will scale with page zoom. Rems and ems will also scale with page zoom. But where pixels sort of get a little stuck is when you have user settings. If you have a pixel-based interface, then you don't get all of these accessibility settings that can let your page scale and let the user actually experience that page in a way that works best for them, because your user knows best. Ultimately, as designers, we need to put our ego aside and make sure that the user is able to access our experiences or applications and do it in a way that works best for them. So this is just one example, and I was happy to see that we can now transition to rems in Figma. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
I had someone yesterday that said, you wouldn't do that to your grandma, would you? You wouldn't squash her preferred font size. And I was like, no, I definitely wouldn't. But yeah, because most of our parents, they have their font set to really large on their device. And if you use pixel size 16 pixels on their font, you say, I don't care what you want. You're getting 16. But if you use one rem, it will be their preferred font size, and you can build upon their preference. So anyway, good.
There's some
Love
more.
that one. And then here's more units you have. So the web is packed full of relative units. These know the font metrics. So this is the line height unit. I'm going to show you a demo later where I build vertical rhythm with the line height unit. We have the X unit, or the Rex unit, which represents the root X, and that's going to tell you the X height from that font that's being used to render right there. You can use that as a unit to build out demos. And the bottom one isn't for another language. That's the water character, and it's the IC unit, and it represents the height of the IC unit. Lots of cool units on the web. So here's that vertical rhythm demo, which we're going to need to rename it, because you're going to see in a second that I switch them from vertical to something else. So here's right to left. So I have vertical rhythm in right to left and left to right, and I have it in vertical right to left, like if I'm in Japanese or Chinese. I have vertical rhythm on the web in every single one of these scenarios. Look at how the links and the baselines all line up everywhere. This was previously not possible, but the line height unit gives us this capability. And there I am just scaling the base line height size.
It's so cool to see this. And a way that we can get all this for free is just simply changing our mental model when we build interfaces. Right now, we think of things as a compass rose: top, right, bottom, left, north, east, south, west. But if we swap that mentality to now think of things as block and inline and use start and end, we can get all of that for free, all that internationalization. And we don't have to have multiple style sheets. We don't have to have multiple comps or designs. We can let the browser make these decisions for us and make it work well, make it do what it does best. And if you're not familiar with block and inline, the way to differentiate these is with inline, think of it like you're reading a paragraph. So if you have a paragraph and you might have a link inside that paragraph, that link or that A tag is going to be displayed in line with the rest of your text. The paragraph, if you have another one that follows it, will be displayed block as the page flows from top to bottom. And that's in a left to right language like English. If you have something that is right to left, the inline direction will switch. So that's where the start and end switch. And as you saw earlier, if you have something in a more traditional Japanese or Chinese language, that might entirely swap the directionality of your site. So you get all this for free if you start thinking in logical properties and just change the way that you're writing those values.
Yep, and here's my website where I did this. So again, I'm not thinking in top right, bottom left. I'm thinking in block and inline. I've made the switch. It's really, really nice. It's almost like talking about stage right and stage left. You're kind of augmenting the way you think about the box that allows you to reach more people with less. So normally, what you would have to do here is switch your margin left to be margin right when the direction is right to left, and there's all this junk that you had to do. But if all you do is switch to saying margin inline end and margin block start, you kind of change your verbiage. You reach any language in any layout mode, all for free by giving it to the browser. So here's my website looking awesome in right to left, top to bottom, and I didn't do crap except use logical properties.
I love getting stuff for free. Yes, snaps. CSS. I hear you. I love it.
Well, there's more theme and user preference stuff to talk about. Of course, we all are familiar with light mode.
You can also build dark modes, which are all the rage right now, too.
Yeah, you got to put a switch in there in case the system's in one setting, but they like your site in light mode, but their system in dark. You got to build a mode switch.
Yeah, and you can also have forced colors. So there are user preferences for forced color modes for light and dark.
There's also high contrast light and dark mode.
And low contrast, just for completion. So one example of a light-dark switch is I've thrown one into my personal site here where your user doesn't have to go in and change their operating system preferences to change how they want to access the site. And another thing I want to highlight here is that light and dark modes aren't just limited to color palettes. They're not just limited to variable styles, which are really cool to see, but you can also do things like art direction. This is a media query. It's a color scheme media query that lets you have access to all of your CSS styles. So you can change shadows and imagery and blend mode effects and anything that you can style in CSS. So I would definitely encourage you to get really creative with dark themes because you can go beyond just color changes.
Awesome, and you might not be familiar with what a forced color mode is, but that's when someone goes into their system and says, I don't care what any website's colors are, or apps for that matter, I want to force my own set of colors that I know are accessible for my reading style. So here I'm in light theme, and a user's gonna put forced colors mode on while in light theme, and all I do in my particular design is I'm gonna let them do it, I don't stop it, but I do make sure that my box shadows turn into a border so that my cards still look like cards. And that's like a small thing that I add into my styles to make sure that if someone does visit in a forced mode, I'm handling it well. And this next screen, this is my dark theme. It has the same thing. There's box shadows here, and they want to force dark mode, which also looks kind of retro and rad. Look at that. It looks like
It's like Star
Tron.
Wars vibe.
Tron drove through and like highlighted all my links and stuff. Like I didn't pick that yellow. That's by the operating system. But I did make sure there's a border there so that they still get that nice contained element.
And to continue thinking about our users, another thing to think about is the prefers reduced motion media query. So as we really think about animation and how we're introducing animation throughout our interfaces, your user might have preferences to have a reduced animation experience. So here I have a radial menu that has a lot of micro interactions. There's this plus that turns into an X. These menu items are sort of flying out and rotating. The opacity is changing. There's a lot going on. But you can create a prefers reduced motion experience where they might fade in or crossfade, and then when you click out of that experience, it might just disappear instantly. So prefers reduced motion doesn't mean no motion. It just means an experience that can be a little bit more accessible and useful for people who have trouble with things that are a little too flashy. And that brings us to the last piece of the trifecta of responsive design, which is being responsive to the interface. This is where we're really seeing an exponential number of options and views for components and interfaces. This is where you're sort of playing like 4D chess with your designs by creating logical components that own their responsive logical information.
Yep, the page is less relevant now. It's where is that component? How much space does it have? And here's a grid layout. So I've made a design that looks like a mobile design. And in grid, just like if I'm in a design tool, I can kind of name all my grid lines. And this is DevTools turning on the different grids that I've defined in CSS. So as a designer and a developer, we can look at this and have the same language. But there's a critical set of named lines in there. And it's the far left and the far right are called full bleed start and full bleed end. And that allowed that child image that's many components deep into the center there, snap to the full bleed with one line of CSS. This would normally be a bunch of negative margin hacks, a bunch of junk, and now it's seamless between designer and developer, and the code to get it done is a piece of cake.
I feel like this is one of those features that's really been missing on the web platform because in all the design tools, ever since I started learning to design, you would create your baseline grid and you'd snap your components onto it. And as you adjusted the layout, you'd reposition them. And we didn't have the ability to do this reliably on the web platform until recently, and this will be landing in all major browsers very soon, this summer. So now let's talk about container queries. Who here has heard of the container queries? Okay, some of you.
Oh, y'all are
and the ones who have are very excited for
Get
good
ready.
reason.
This is exciting stuff.
This is a huge win for responsive design, and it changes our entire mental model. It's a whole new paradigm for how we think about responsive design. Where previously, we had to use media queries, which might be a spicy take, but I think media queries are a hack for responsive design because they only give us information about the viewport. So it makes sense for media information, but it also gives us the viewport size. So this is one way to create page layout, but that doesn't give us the ability to actually know information about the containers that our components live inside of. With container queries, we now have access to information including the size, style values of any component inside of the page. That could be the sidebar, it could be a card, it could be a hero section. And now it can work a lot more granularly, starting from the smallest component on your page. Instead of thinking of mobile-first design and going up to desktop, we can now really start to think about component-first design, which works so much better in the current ecosystem where we're building framework-based, component-based applications. So this is really cool that we can now have these primitives, and they're in all stable browsers. They have been for a few months now, so you can really start to rethink the way that you're building your design and using systems from the core.
Yeah, mobile, we've had media queries that were like outward in, and now we can think about inward out. The component can own more. So here's the same component, 3 of the same things. This also means your artboards are more important than they've ever been, because that artboard, you can have 4 variants of 4 different sizes of artboards, and the developer can implement a different design and different layout given the amount of space that this component has. And so look at these. There are 3 different column sizes, and the component says, I don't know, how much space do I have? Should I be landscape or portrait? And we tell that component to own it. It gets to look to see, how much space do I have? I have enough to be landscape. I'll swap to landscape. And we have lots of cool demos that do a lot of this cool intelligence. Like, here's a calendar. Look at the events and look at the dates at the top. This isn't a media query, because a media query is irrelevant once you hit mobile. Look at mobile has the same styles that desktop has, which means that if you tried to design in a mobile layout and a desktop layout, you probably wouldn't have gotten this result. But this, we built intelligence into the components, and they're able to make their own design decisions. And they're good decisions, because look at how much space it has when it's on mobile. That's a lot more space than it ever had on most of the desktop layouts. And look at the text, it gets more bold, it grows. This is just really, really cool stuff that we bake it into the component itself. No more parents raining down rules. We got children telling the parent what to do.
All the rules,
yeah.
more rules.
Ah, it's good.
So you can see this here in an entire interface. This is a plant site where all of these product cards with these plants are the exact same component, whether it's in the hero section or the sidebar or in that grid of items that changes size. This component can own its responsive styling information. It knows when to be single column. It knows when to be 2 column. It knows when to remove some of that additional information that it doesn't need. This is just one example of how we can use this kind of logic and create this singular component that owns this information. It's its own file in your code base. It's its own art, probably many artboards actually, to create all these variants. And it grows and grows and grows. And we can separate things like our page layout or the macro layout as a media query, which makes sense. Those are page designs there, from the smaller item designs, the micro layouts. And here we have this inbox example where the layout shifts. You have a sidebar at one point. You have this top section. But each of those items in the inbox knows when to add the timestamp back or remove it, change some of the sizing, and change the positioning of itself. And that brings me to these micro layouts. So we can have things like this banner, which looks different based on the view that it's in. When it's in a hero and it might have more space, it can have an icon and bolder text. When it has less space, that icon goes away. Here we've swapped to have more space again, because we can now divorce the page size from the components, styling information. This is a whole new paradigm for building responsively from the ground up. And it can be as narrow as a card. So here I have a responsive card where that card has a responsive icon, and that icon gets cart lines that disappear, and then a plus button that appears or disappears when it has space. And we get text that gets added and removed.
It's so cool.
This is something that we can only do in a flexible medium like the web, where you can now start to think about what is the in-between and answer the question of, how do I go from this mobile comp to this desktop comp, by creating these components, designing components for your developers, building these components in a flexible way. So we don't have to have an answer to all the intermediaries. The components know, and they can place themselves. And so we can now build onto this and build an entire page with this cart. And that cart will know when to add the cart lines, will know when to add that little plus button, will know when to add text, because it knows its parent's size. And this is the future of responsive design.
Yes.
But it's just the start.
And I love all the artboards, all the cool stuff that y'all have been getting into this past couple days.
Yeah.
Just feeds directly into, you can start doing this in your tool and give it to your developers and tell them, I know you can do this. I just saw it at Figma. And I am so stoked to talk about style queries because essentially this is modes. Y'all just got variables and you got modes. This is what style queries are. They can ask a container what's the value of a custom property and literally change. It could be like I saw a demo where there was a card that was dragged across 3 or 4 different boxes and it adjusted itself to match the theme that it was in. I saw Charizard go from level 0 to level 40 and it grew. The same exact thing happens on the web now and they're called style queries. A container can say, what mode am I in? And you can literally name them modes. In this particular case, each of these cards has been given a different mode. One is rainy, one is sunny. When it's rainy, change the gradient, change the icon, change the treatment. This stuff is in the browser, and y'all are doing it now in your tool too. It's so cool.
I love that everything is becoming a lot more dynamic, too.
It's awesome. Look, here's another one, changing the modes. This time, I'm just using an HTML radio set. And so you change the mode, the button adapts. It's the same concept. So we are coming together as designers and developers through y'all's tool and through the web.
Yeah. And if you were excited about container queries, you'll be even more excited about content awareness and logical components with a new API called HAS. This lets components be aware of not only what's outside of them, but also what's inside of them, what their children are, what the state of their children are. And it's essentially a parent element, a parent selector, but it lets you do so much more than that. So a basic example here, we have a couple examples from Ahmad Shadid because they're very beautiful. We like his more than ours. So he has a card here where we're applying 2 different styles if it has an image and if it doesn't. If it has an image, we have a 2-column layout. So if you're using grid, you probably have to flow it into 2 grid columns. And if it doesn't have an image, it's going to be 1 column, so it spans the entire card. Additionally, we're going to make that card without an image stand out a little bit more by giving it a border. So the border top will attract a little bit more visual attention so that it works a little bit better in line with other cards that have an image. This is the start of how you can write styling rules, logical styling rules that your developers can implement or you can implement.
Yeah, so a card being intelligent to the presence of an image or not. Here's a nav bar that adapts to how many links it needs to show. So look, I'll just add some links and watch the whole thing shift around once it reaches a state at which we've decided as a team that the artboard needs to shift the layout. We can move the search icon, we can move the brand. All of this is one smart nav. Instead of designing 3 separate navs, it's one intelligent one that extends and grows with the amount of children. So this is a quantity query here that wants to know how many links do I need to show, and it adapts itself to show it.
And another quantity query is here where you can see how many items are in this action bar. If you have 1 item, you can have the layout just be aligned left. If you have 3 items or more items, you can adjust what that spacing looks like. So here we have the justification of these items swapping to space between. So you can see how this grows and grows and grows with all of these micro components and micro layouts in your UI.
Yep, here's another good example with amount of authors. This is a really common design task. It's like, what's the design look like when there's 1? What's the design look like when there's 3? And what's the design look like when there's a lot? But in this case, we're just showing
that a plus, ...
Yeah, you're like, oh man, there's 25 authors. I don't know how to represent that. But this particular one, you can see we can count, again, how many authors do we represent, and it changed the component entirely. So you would deliver to the developer 2 artboards that represent this and tell them that you want a container query to query how many children there are and adapt dynamically in the browser based on your design.
And you can also do this with the layout of visual information. So here there is a layout of a table, essentially, where we have some information, name, job title, department. But if you have 4 or more items, you might want to have more of this appear in the same view. So we can now swap this to 2-column. We can change the typography. We have access to all of the styles. And we can adjust those based on how many children. Quantity queries are super, super useful.
All right, and here's some cool typography stuff that has changed. We know and love variable fonts. We know and love fluid typography, as well as balancing. And so let's look at some of those.
So one thing that you can do to solve the question of how do we go from this mobile comp to the desktop comp is think about typography. And fluid typography is one of those things that works really well in this responsive medium. So in this example, I have just a blog post on my blog where for the title, I'm using fluid typography to give it a minimum size, a maximum size using the clamp function, and then an actual size that's going to sort of accordion in between and go from one to the other, stretching and shrinking until it hits those maximum and minimum values. And the first paragraph is also doing that. So we have a lot of control. And you can do this with the entire viewport, or you can do this with a container query. So we have container query units where we can have this fluid typography live inside the page itself. So that could be anywhere, any card, any hero section that has this sort of fluid effect with the typography.
Component fluid typography, not just
really
page.
Cool.
And this is a one-liner in CSS now, where instead of manually adding a line breaker, articulating that to a developer, and then you probably only did it in English and didn't do it in all the other languages, you can now give it to the browser, and we have two options. One of them is called balance, and one of them is called pretty. So if you don't apply it, it's no big deal, but if you do apply balance, it's going to try to make a block, a text block out of it that's harmonious. There's an algorithm that goes through and does this dynamically in the browser. And then we also have pretty. Pretty will ensure that no widows or orphans will appear for this particular text layout. So you can automate that into the browser. You could put this in there today. It is harmless to put it in there, and it makes it really rad. I think Chrome's the only support, but it's spec'd, and browsers are going to be implementing this. Enjoy.
Yeah, this is an awesome progressive enhancement because your users will get that auto experience that they have today. But if they're on the latest version of Chrome or other browsers that will add this, hopefully all browsers will implement this.
Ask for it. Rally.
Ask for it. Yeah, ask other browsers to implement this. This is such a killer feature that lets the browser handle layout for typography. And it's such a big pain point.
Every language, too. Every language. Balanced.
Let the browser make the decisions for it. I love this one. OK, cool. Next.
Well, we've also got variable fonts that have tons of different axes for control. So not only is it fun to go customize a font and not have to deliver 50 different fonts to have 50 different parties, you can have one font deliver many different parties. And I built a demo earlier today where I'm listening to the user's preferences, that if they prefer a high contrast layout or high contrast design, I actually make the font a little bit bolder with the variable font. If they want less, I go less. Dark and light themes, I can use these different user preferences to tailor the font on demand for them. It's really cool.
It's so cool. And there's so many variants and so many axes that you have control over and access to. And you can interpolate between these. You can animate between them, too.
Just like this. So I've got this font called Kablam. This kind of looks like Rugrats. This font has the ability built into morph, as it's called. And through a little bit of CSS, you can see I wrote an animation in the keyframes that just forever goes between no morph and their max morph. And I made it text editable just to see what the browser would do. And the browser's like, oh, I'll just keep animating it while you change the text. And I was like, I love you.
It's so smooth.
I love you, browser. That's really rad.
So cool. And we can bring color into it too, because some variable fonts have color axes, and some of them come with color. So this font is called Nabla, and it comes with a few different font variant palettes. So you can choose one of the predefined palettes, or you can bring your own colors to it. I've played with this font. I've added my own color palette to it. It's so cool to see all these capabilities, how they can animate between color on hover or other states dynamically in the browser. We have these APIs and these tools available to us. It's so cool.
And it doesn't stop there. You got emoji. So let's say you wanted to see a blue duck. I want the duck to be blue. Well, then you can just tell it to be blue through the interface that the font has provided for you. You want a red duck? You got a red duck. You want a psychedelic duck? You want a goth duck? That's the duck I like.
That's Adam's duck.
A goth font, goth, emoji set. Super cool stuff. You just write a little bit of CSS and you can target the different aspects of these characters and change their color.
And you can hover on the goth duck and get the psychedelic duck so you can change it up. There's so much you can do on the web platform. You can make these native text effects on the web platform using imagery and shadows and gradients, and you can do extrusion and pixelation and add depth and patterns. There's a lot that you can do on the platform. And as Adam showed you in that last demo, it's text editable, which means it's readable by SEO. It's translatable. It's a flexible medium that you can now build within. And that brings us to transitions, transitioning to some interactive ways to make your user feel like they're in a fluid, interesting experience.
Oh, we've got some cool transition stuff to show you. Okay, so this is called View Transitions. This is shipped in Chrome right now. It's another web spec, and this works exactly like Smart Animate. So just like how we had style queries, which is the same thing as variables and modes and switching things based on containers, based on variables, we have Smart Animate on the web through a concept of view transitions. This particular demo, I'm literally changing the text through JavaScript. I'm saying T, and then I'm like, okay, a second has gone by, make it R. And there's only one letter that's in there at a time. Imagine it's like having two artboards, or even having an artboard for T, an artboard for R, an artboard for N, all of the letters here. And the browser takes a picture of each when I change it, and it allows me to say how the old one goes out and how does a new one come in. And so here's what I'm doing here. I'm saying, hey, old letter, push back and fade out. New letter, slide up and fade in. And it's just a couple lines of CSS, and I can animate almost anything, just the same way you're building artboards that have shared elements that morph and know about their presence between the two states. The same thing is in the browser. Ask your developers about view transitions. They're super rad.
It's a new feature. And another cool thing that you can do with this is if you have video or GIFs that play these live elements, they will continue to play as you morph through the transition and you go through the experience. So this is one of my favorite demos by Maxi Ferreira that shows this visual morphing. You get that feedback. It's really hard to navigate in a digital space because we don't have those real-world cues. So when you create these digital cues of where you're going to, where you're coming from, it helps your user feel like they're not only in a more performant, fluid experience, but also how to get from one place to another. So seeing this and seeing these sort of continued interactions, these continued live elements is so, so rad, and it's super, super powerful.
And it doesn't just stop with JavaScript. You can do it across full page loads. So this is a presentation I gave, and every new web page is animating shared elements between. You can see the headers are staying, the code snippets morph, the animated GIFs continue animating. I'm even doing a clip path animation there, like a mask reveal. All of this going across pages, and all we do is articulate which elements are shared between them. And the browser goes, just like between two artboards, this item was here, and now it's over here. How about I just move it over there as you navigate full pages? So you have single-page application opportunities and multi-page opportunities. It's super sick. And here it is on my site. So my site, this is not a single-page application. It's not some React-based thing. This is real, just regular old blog web pages. And look at, I've got scroll-linked animations. The things morph. I can introduce something onto the stage. I can make something exit the stage. I have all these opportunities that the performance is super high, and it's really fun to do.
Here's another, yeah.
That's all CSS. That was all CSS, no JavaScript.
No JS was used. Here's another really cool demo that Adam built, which shows a grid of items that we're filtering through, and we're changing the visualization with sorting and filtering. And so because the browser is able to take a snapshot from one stage to another, that's one part of the morph interaction. The second part is that you can actually control how it gets there. So you can create things like this springy effect using a new easing function called linear in the browser. Linear lets you put as many points as you want in the easing curve. So you could just have it go like 1, 2, or you could do like a spring function. And there's really cool dev tools that let you experiment with this already. So in this example, we have just a change from one view to another using that springy linear easing. And we get this pretty cool effect, letting the browser do the math for us. And if you resize too, you get this rearrange and things can spring.
Yep. All right, now we have scroll-driven animation to talk about, and this is where you can link an animation. Instead of it just playing or pausing, it's as the user scrolls something, it'll move through the animation. So in this particular demo, someone's going to scroll the page, and we take two of the columns, and we translate them in the reverse direction. So as they scroll, the same way the middle one is unaffected, but the two on the other side are directly linked to scroll, and we see this really interesting effect, all with CSS as well.
You can also do scrolly telling. So as you scroll down in this experience, we can actually pause where the user is. We can stack these cards, and we can be in this sticky position until that experience is finished, when you can then scroll out of it. So because we're now linking the animation to the scroller, not a timer, we have control over what the user sees when.
And there's two different types of it. There's a scroll-linked animation, and then there's one about its presence in the viewport. As an element enters, watch the bullets down here. Watch as they fade in naturally based on their own position in the document. There's no stagger applied there. That's just because I've said as they enter the viewport, slide fade in. As you exit the viewport, slide fade out. And same with the header at the top. These are presence scrolling animations, and they're also done with CSS. It's really cool stuff.
All of those components own their logical styling information. They know when they're about to enter the viewport. And it doesn't have to be a full page viewport too. It can be anywhere in your page. So this is an example from Brahms Van Dam of the the items on the edges kind of pushing in and scrolling out at a faster rate than the items in the middle. So you can create these micro interactions throughout your entire interface that just make your site feel a little bit more professional, your entire web application feel a little bit more put together and fluid. And that's what we want for our users.
That was a lot of stuff.
That was a lot, yeah.
But there's never, ever been more opportunity for micro interactions and personalizations, and I wanted y'all to know that. You needed these tools. Go ask your devs about them.
And build this way. Because there's also never been a better opportunity for users to be at the center of design and of everything that you build for them.
And components have never contained so much intelligence. This is so cool. They know how many, what types, everything. It's all possible for you, and we're so happy to share this with you.
So have fun with all of these new design toys, and I can't wait to see what y'all build. Thank you.